If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'd know that I'm not exactly the biggest of fans when it comes to Valhalla. When the PlayStation 5 was released back in 2020, the very first game I bought for it was Valhalla, and I was excited to play it. Just like with the previous console generation, I started my PlayStation 4 journey by playing Black Flag, but the enjoyment I got with these two games are on a completely different spectrum. Even though the series often centers around a group of assassins, Valhalla switches this up. Well, Odyssey did, but Valhalla also did too. And this time we became a Viking. And no, not a Viking assassin, but just a Viking. Now, I'm not a person that only likes the older Assassin's Creed games and not the newer ones at all. In fact, Origins is my favorite Assassin's Creed game alongside Assassin's Creed 2, and I also liked Odyssey. So it's not like I went into Valhalla with a mindset of, oh, here we go, another RPG game. If anything, it was the complete opposite. The trailers and information we got before Valhalla was released made me want to play this game even more. You see, Ubisoft is really good at that. They make these godlike CGI trailers that don't show much about how the game plays, so it's hard to tell if it's going to be good, and I bit the bullet and bought into the pre-release hype. Beyond Ubisoft's high production trailers, if there's something they always get spot on, it's where an Assassin's Creed game is set. I can honestly say there is no bad setting, whether it's going to the Italian Renaissance, to pirates, to Paris, to Victorian London, to ancient Egypt and Greece, and in this case, the Viking era. You see, alongside feudal Japan, the golden age of Vikings is one of my favourite settings for an Assassin's Creed game to go into. I mean, what's there not to like? There's brutal Vikings, bloodshed, and of course England. However, sometimes what we expect is not always what we get. Assassin's Creed Valhalla was a mix of great moments, but also disappointment. This game felt like it tried to honour the old games, while adding new elements. Now, I'm going to try my best to go into this video with a non-negative open mind, which I doubt will last more than 5 minutes. So with that said, this is Assassin's Creed Valhalla 4 years later. Oh, and before I do get into it, I don't often say this at the start of my videos, but I'd appreciate if you hit that subscribe button. It will help me out quite a lot. Anyway, with that said, let's get right into the video. Let's just say as it is. Valhalla is definitely the best looking Assassin's Creed game that's been released. And yes, that also includes Assassin's Creed Mirage, which came after. So I can never criticize how this game looks in terms of graphical fidelity. Everything is detailed. Whether it's Norway, England, Vinland, Asgard, the design of outfits, weapons, you name it. There was no half-arsed design in that regard. In fact, as I mentioned at the start of the video, the one thing Ubisoft does not half-arse is the world of each game. The shift from Syndicate to Origins was ridiculously large. This meant that the difference in size of each map in both games would also be large. Origins did not disappoint with its portrayal of ancient Egypt, and neither did Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So when I came into Valhalla, the world was the least of my concerns. Now, just because I said the world looks good, that doesn't necessarily mean what's also within is good. Because at times, England in particular will often feel empty and isolated. Now, the first actual place that we're able to explore and move around is Norway, which this might be a hot take, but I like to think Norway is more engaging than England itself in the game. The lands here are harsh and cold, with icy rivers and tall cliffs capped with snow. Now, surprisingly, not many people realize how much there is to actually do in Norway. For example, there's world events, animus anomalies, hidden boss fights, hidden treasure, and even finding insanely powerful weapons like Thor's goddamn hammer. So much for historical accuracy, right? Oh, and that's not even mentioning flighting, which is like the Viking version of a rap battle. Now, even if your goal for Valhalla was just to get to England instantly, I honestly would recommend at least exploring a little of Norway. Now, the reason I say a little and not explore it extensively is that Norway has a lot of high level areas. And the good thing is that you're able to return whenever you want during the rest of the game. In fact, the story actually guides you back there, but delaying your departure from Norway might give you the wrong impression of the game's pace and scope. The real adventure starts off in England, and speaking of England, the moment you actually step foot out of Norway to get here, that's when you realize how massive this game actually is. What's interesting about the world in Valhalla is that it's not just consisting of Norway and England. In fact, we get to explore smaller maps like Vinland, as well as Ireland and France through post-launch DLCs. Now, near the start of this segment, I talked about how England could feel empty and isolated, and that's the problem when you arrive from Norway. There seems to be an apparent lack of villages and cities located throughout England, and slowly over time you'll start to notice that each terrain has been copied and pasted. Now, the best thing to actually do is compare this world to another large open world game, and that's when you start to realize that Assassin's Creed Valhalla's world is nowhere near other games' worlds. Take Red Dead Redemption 2 for example, and before you say that's an unfair comparison, Valhalla is Ubisoft's highest selling Assassin's Creed game, whereas Red Dead Redemption 2 is not even Rockstar's highest selling game. That belongs to GTA 5, and even with GTA 5, the world of Los Santos is on another level compared to Valhalla's world. Now going back to Red Dead Redemption 2, in quite literally every corner of the map in that game, you'll find something interesting to do. There is no copy and paste at all, there's barely any emptiness, and if there was, you'd often find strangers to talk to and things to do, unlike Valhalla, which fills its empty landscapes with foliage and forests, which creates this very isolated atmosphere that can easily put you off. Yes, I understand that England back then, when the Vikings invaded, was like that, but this is a video game after all, and an engaging world is one of, if not the most important part of large open world games. That's why I said this game does not know what it's trying to be. Is it trying to cater to an older fanbase while also catering to an RPG focused fanbase? That's the impression I get when I play Valhalla. Now, apart from the emptiness and isolated feeling of England, the actual design of it is quite stunning to be fair. There's a ton of lush green hills, forests in autumn colours, and many marshes filled with reeds. The overall landscape of England is marked by ancient ruins scattered throughout, which to be fair is historically accurate. England itself in the game appears to be interconnected through a network of roads that link many villages to fortified cities. Now, even though I said a lot of the terrain is copied and pasted, I will say the regions themselves do have their own unique kind of vibe to them. For example, in London, there's a lot of Roman-like structures and more delicate wooden buildings. You'll even see the now famous River Thames cutting through the city. There's also the region of Grantbridgeshire, which is unique in its own way as it features extensive marshlands and small islands of land that seem to appear from the water with all sorts of short trees. But it's what is between each region that feels copied and pasted. My personal nitpick with the game is its frequent foggy weather, though perhaps that's just how England was back then. I'm not entirely sure, having no personal experience to compare it with. That said, when played on the latest gaming hardware, it's undeniably the most visually stunning Assassin's Creed game in the series, and the only game I can see rivaling it in that regard is probably Codename Red, or maybe even Hex, as those games seem to be worked on from the ground up. The world of Valhalla introduces new types of interactions which attempt to refresh the gameplay loop of previous games. Instead of, typical side quests, we now have the world events that would occur as you explore. For example, there's a world event that involves Eivor, a boy, his father, and the smelly house that they live in. This world event wants you to find a way to help the boy clean his father, as he refuses to bathe. It's so fucking random, but sometimes it can be interesting. It's a small world event where our skills can be put to use, even if it does not aid with the overall narrative of the game. However, these world events don't exactly match the impressive nature of random encounters in games like Red Dead Redemption 2. It felt like Ubisoft tried their hardest to implement a more natural feel with these side quests, but personally I felt like the execution falls short. One massive flaw is the lack of tracking for these world events. You see, if you miss an important detail, you might find yourself unsure of what to do next, and this is often frustrating, as it then forces you to look on YouTube for a world event guide. At least that's what my experience was, because I forgot everything that had just happened a few days ago when I turned off my PlayStation 5 to go to sleep. So turning it back on 3 days later and seeing no tracking at all for these world events, I mean, how do you expect me to know what to do then? I feel like the only reason somebody would complete these world events is just to gain XP and skill points and nothing more. If you're a person that's not aiming to 100% the game and get the platinum trophy, then there's no need to do every world event. There's also other activities and things to collect that might not be worth your time. For instance, collecting all the Roman artifacts just gets you a few decorative items for Ravensthorpe, and the final reward, a goddamn shield, which first of all looks like it was ripped straight from Origins, and second of all is not even good. On top of the world events and the Roman artifacts, there's also the cane stone puzzles that provide zero enjoyment. If you genuinely enjoy these, then you must be over 60 years old, because that's the only logical explanation I can think of. It's quite funny when you compare the cane stone puzzles in Valhalla to the haikus from Ghost of Tsushima. Both are interactive mini world events that operate in similar ways, but the haikus are so much more than stacking stones on top of each other for no reason at all. You contemplate loss, family, war, death, fear, and so on, and it's an endless stream of human emotion. These haikus provide touching closures, they provide emotional poems, and many people enjoy them a lot. So kudos to whoever at Sucker Punch Productions came up with the idea of haikus. You definitely deserve a raise. Now going back to Valhalla, these cane stone puzzles at first are not hard at all, because they're pretty simple in terms of their shape, and they don't require you to stack them to fucking Mars. But the more you progress in the game, the more these stone puzzles get challenging. If a stone fell, well, start over. I feel like Ubisoft forgot that this is a video game, not stacking stone simulator. All it takes for these stone puzzles to be fun is a slight mini narrative, which personally would have elevated them massively, but they couldn't even do that. The worst part is the reward. All of this just to get one singular skill point. As I said earlier about world events, if you're not going for a 100% run, then why on God's green earth would you want to suffer through these? Raids on the other hand offer a more direct form of action. You can start them along rivers where enemies are present. Approaching in your longbow, blowing the war horn and launching an attack is a fun experience at first. These raids are especially important in certain locations where you can collect resources to upgrade your settlement, which I'll talk about more later in the video. The idea is that you can continuously engage in these raids. Whenever you feel like it, you can just jump into your longbow and set off to plunder resources. The interesting part about this concept is that it's a never-ending nature. Even if you completely obliterate a location, it would not be long until it's rebuilt, allowing you to return and loot it once more. This feature kind of creates an endless opportunity for raiding and looting within the game. Now, while it can often sometimes be enjoyable, this mechanic isn't used to its full potential. The rewards you get for participating in these raids are not worth the effort that they require. The only decent items you find are a full set of armor and weapons inspired by St. George. This particular set is distributed across various camps, hidden in chests, and discovering them involves a bit of randomness. There's also the ship upgrading stuff, which was a complete frustrating loop of gathering the same items for a little benefit. Oh boy, the Yoms Vikings themselves during these raids are fucking useless. It seems like you have to reach a certain level before they're able to actually handle themselves without getting killed. After doing many of these raids, I easily found myself losing interest in returning to take part in the river raids again. I mean, it didn't even take long to obtain the best gear from it. These raids also do not contribute anything to the main storyline, not even a little filler part or a smoothly intertwined connection. There was just nothing, and it was strange considering that raids were things Viking used to do in real history, so not seeing a single connection to the main story for it did feel a bit off. The only slight interaction we got was with that guy that introduced the actual mode itself. Now, compared to the river raids, one thing I did enjoy was the large scale siege battles. Unlike the river raids, these sieges are tied to the narrative. You've got an intense soundtrack playing to increase the mood, accompanied with the sounds of burning oil and flying arrows. In terms of an immersive castle siege experience, I don't really think there's many other games out there that do this better. However, with every positive thing I can say about Valhalla, there will also be negatives. And whilst I did like the castle sieges, there was one giant, massive, humongous, stupidly big, large flaw that just was impossible to ignore. And that is how stupid it was that I could simply climb over a goddamn wall, dodge about 50 guards, break 2 wooden blocks, and then simply open the gates for my fellow Vikings in the middle of a massive battle. So when I said I felt immersed in the castle sieges, this part of it is what breaks that immersion. The fact that you can simply shoot down drawbridges is just silly. The idea that the chains are weak enough to be broken by a single arrow makes no sense. Also, simply attacking castles was way too easy, even on the hardest of difficulties. Enemy AI is not implemented effectively, and if anything, this part kind of reminds me of the river raids. They seem great at first, but then you quickly realize how simple, stupid and repetitive they are. Do you remember the homestead from Assassin's Creed 3? Well, before I played Valhalla and I saw the information regarding Ravensthorpe, I was gullible, and I believed that it was going to be similar to the frontier/homestead we saw in Assassin's Creed 3, and oh boy was I wrong. Now, the concept of our Ravensthorpe settlement is amazing. I personally felt like it was wasted potential, and I know a lot of you are sick of hearing those two words, wasted potential, but sadly that's the only words to describe some of the things in this franchise. Now, Ravensthorpe acts as your settlement in England. It's the place the Raven clan discovered when we moved from Norway to England. I really like the idea of building a settlement in the game, but it feels like they didn't put much effort into designing it. It's kind of odd that you cannot build basic things like fences or gates, which felt like the most common sense idea to have, especially for Vikings building a settlement to prevent outsiders from invading. It also felt like a lot of the buildings use the same model with slight alterations. Just look at the blacksmith building, and then look at the seer's hut. It's pretty obvious that no thought went into designing both buildings. In fact, this was a simple case of lazy designing. Building a settlement from scratch, upgrading it, and then actually seeing it evolve is something I genuinely enjoyed doing. Ravensthorpe had so much promise, but somehow ended up feeling a bit lackluster. For instance, Randvi is always at that table, day in, day out, without ever moving. It would have been great to see characters with daily routines, instead of them just standing around. Imagine if Ubisoft had introduced occasional attacks on our settlement, or had traders and wagons passing through to make the place feel more alive. On top of that, it would have been fantastic if the characters in Ravensthorpe had their own questlines, with significant rewards. Similar to the homestead missions in Assassin's Creed 3. The idea of unlocking new side quests as you develop the settlement could have made it much more interactive. So while I can appreciate what Ubisoft envisioned for Ravensthorpe, it feels like they didn't fully bring that vision to life. Now here is where the one major issue lies in the game, and that is the story of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. If you go into this game with the mindset that this is not Assassin's Creed and it's purely a Viking experience, then I'm sure you're going to have a lot of fun and Valhalla is probably one of your favourite games. The modern day kicks off with Layla from the last 2 Assassin's Creed games joining forces with Sean and Rebecca. In the modern day, they're dealing with a global crisis caused by a sudden spike in the Earth's magnetic field. A mysterious message leads them to New England, USA, specifically to the grave of a Viking named Eivor. The promise of the modern day story in Valhalla is for the modern day team to find clues in Eivor's past life by using the animus that might help them solve their current problems. Just like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the game allows us to choose between a male or female Eivor. Now personally, I went with the female Eivor because she's the canon character for the game. You can argue all you want in the comments below about that. Now the prologue starts off with a young Eivor being tasked to give a bracelet to the new leader as a sign of loyalty. But during the celebration, attackers come and despite trying to escape, Eivor ends up trying to fight. Sadly, Eivor's father dies, and Eivor is taken in by Sigurd's family, who is the leader's son. Fast forward a bit, grown up Eivor narrowly escapes being sold as a slave and heads home, determined to avenge their father's death. When Eivor returns, they find out that their brother Sigurd is back with 2 assassins, Hatham and Basim. At a big dinner party, Eivor gets a hidden blade and talks about the man that we want dead. Turns out he's part of the Order, aka the Proto-Templars of that time period. We learn that the mysterious Hatham has also been tasked to kill this certain individual. Oh look, Hatham does his best impression of altair. Oh, never mind. He gets absolutely shit on and is thrown against the side of a wall. We pretty much take down Kjotve the Cruel. At some point between everything that had just happened, we saw a seer who makes Eivor have a weird vision about betraying Sigurd, so Eivor attempts to not do that throughout the entire story. After all this, at King Harald's place, Eivor's stepfather decides to give up his throne to Harald. Angry with this choice, it's decided to leave for England. This is where we set out to travel to this foreign country to raid, make friends with kings, form alliances and build a new home. And yes, there's also some parts about fighting enemies from the Order too, which don't really connect to the main narrative. Now the actual story after the prologue takes place in England. Quite a few of the Raven clan's acquainted clans have already made their mark in England, spreading their Viking culture. The story honestly kind of feels a bit like Black Flag in a way, where you're close to the assassins but you're not actually one of them. However, unlike Edward Kenway, Eivor never joins the assassins, which does seem odd given how important of a role they play in the game. Now despite this, the hidden ones are prominently featured in the story, with their leader Basim and his apprentice Hatham standing out as particularly interesting characters. In fact, we did play as Basim in the game after being Mirage, so that was quite strange to make him the main protagonist. As I mentioned earlier, Eivor's story features a prophecy that she will one day betray her brother. This idea seems impossible to her, especially because they both dream of being honored together in Valhalla. They share a strong connection, built through family loss and the challenge of starting over in new lands. However, as the story goes on, the close relationship between the siblings starts to weaken. Our main goal in England is to form alliances with the rulers of different regions to ensure the success of our new community. This idea to me was very lackluster as it often felt repetitive. This part of the game is very typical of Ubisoft's style. You complete a main quest in each region to form an alliance, and then you do several smaller side quests and treasure hunts to fully complete each area. However, there are some changes to this usual approach. You see, England itself is split into 4 big regions: Mercia, East Anglia, Northumbria and Wessex. Each is ruled by leaders who Eivor has to face to achieve glory. As the game moves forward, it's clear that Assassin's Creed Valhalla plans to go beyond England, making the story seem even bigger. The main story feels like a real Viking adventure, which adds to its sense of authenticity. So that's why I always say, if you enjoy history and Vikings, this is 1,000,000% the game for you, as that's exactly what it offers. Anyway, going back to the story, while Eivor is busy gaining support in various regions, Sigurd searches for a woman named Fulke, who he believes can help him. However, Fulke captures him and tortures Sigurd, revealing herself to be part of the Order. Now, plot twist, Eivor is suddenly having visions of being Odin and witnesses all sorts of Norse mythology. She learns that these visions are memories of an ancient advanced civilization known as the ezio that created the humans. Yeah, you can probably imagine that this is where the story starts to get a bit confusing. I mean, it is no surprise that Valhalla is Ubisoft's least finished game. If the political region stuff was off-putting, then this solidifies it. We then rescue a one-armed Sigurd along with Basim. After securing alliances in different regions and visiting Vinland for no reason at all, this is where we start to approach the ending of the story. Sigurd takes Eivor back to Norway to an ezio temple. Inside, they enter a simulation of Valhalla, but Eivor breaks free and rejects Odin's influence. After waking up, another plot twist happens. Basim has decided he's evil and captures Sigurd to show his true identity as Loki from the ezio civilization. It turns out that Loki had taken over Basim's body using ancient technology to seek his revenge against Eivor, who he thought was Odin reborn. I know it sounds a bit confusing, but just stick with me here. Basim or Loki's clan fails, and he ends up trapped in the simulation himself known as Yggdrasil. Eivor becomes the leader of the Raven clan when Sigurd steps down because he is of course unfit to lead. I mean, the one arm thing is a pretty good reason to step down. It's painfully obvious that Valhalla's ending with Basim was to tie in a DLC. In fact, that DLC is Assassin's Creed Mirage, which was made to become its own mainline game. Now when I finished the main story, I'll admit, I did get the quote-unquote bad ending, but was it really that bad? After watching the good ending on YouTube, I did not see that as the good ending and it still felt disappointing. So if anything, if I was to go back in time to replay the game, which thank God is not a possibility, I stand by my choices, even if our one-armed brother Sigurd disagreed. Seeing Sigurd throughout the story call you selfish was a bit annoying, but he was a character that was wrong so many times in the main story. He would criticize you for taking your father's wealth. Yeah, that is contradicting because Sigurd despises his own father. So yeah, eventually after I finally got through the long and tedious main story of Valhalla, I was really drained of playing this game. I tried to do almost everything in the game, which at first was nice but felt repetitive and dull. There seemed to be more locked doors that Eivor could not open than interesting parts of the story. Assassin's Creed Valhalla maintains the open world framework established by its predecessors, introducing a handful of minor adjustments along the way. The three pillars of Assassin's Creed for me are combat, stealth and parkour. Now despite me not having the most positive mindset for Valhalla, if there's one thing I can somewhat appreciate, it's the combat. It's pretty straightforward but more complex than the older Assassin's Creed games, where in those games you could defeat enemies with a single counter move. Here your weapon choices are limited. You will not find a variety of loot to just randomly pick up and use. There's basic light and heavy attack options, along with a button for parrying attacks and another one for dodging. Using heavy attacks deals more damage but uses up stamina, while dodging is easier to time but also consumes stamina. Light attacks and successful parries help preserve your stamina and increase your adrenaline level. Once you've filled up 4 adrenaline points, you can perform special moves you unlock by finding specific books in the game. These special moves include a powerful unblockable attack, throwing axes, and a move that's kind of similar to Scorpion from Mortal Kombat, where you throw a knife attached to a rope to pull enemies closer and hit them as they reel in. When it comes to these abilities, I will say that they often feel more like flashy finishers rather than seamlessly blending into combat, because if you're getting your ass kicked, just use a random special move and suddenly you killed your enemy even if you were pretty much about to die. However, I did appreciate the reintroduction of the hidden blade, which was something that was absent in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It is a bit strange that the hidden blade in Valhalla is not exactly hidden, as it's showcased to be on Eivor's arm instead of under the wrist, but regardless, it's still cool to see such an iconic weapon come back. The difficulty of enemies is based on their strength compared to the players. However, it's very easy to accidentally wander into areas that are too hard early in the game without any warning. For example, one of the areas near Ravensthorpe has enemies that can kill you very quickly. Running into these areas while exploring can be frustrating because they seem to be blocked off without a clear reason, just to guide you in a certain direction. The game's emphasis on the brutality fitting of the Viking era with the prevalent use of axes, swords, daggers and hammers does stand out. It was nice to see a variety of bows and shields from Origins, adding a lot of diversity to combat encounters. The range of enemy types was another high point, showcasing improvement from previous titles due to the new engine and updated mechanics. The combat system kind of borrows elements from Origins, while steering clear of the aspects that weaken Odyssey's combat, making it a better experience in comparison. Despite not fully capturing the essence of an Assassin's Creed or definitive Viking saga, it certainly does integrate many expected Viking era features like raids and longships, which I talked about more in depth earlier in the video. Raids in particular highlight the combat system's strengths, giving you a valid reason to take part in battles alongside your clan. The boss fights in the game were a mixed bag for me, with some of them being enjoyable and others feeling poorly designed, such as the fights against the daughters of Lurion and Fenrir, which were more frustrating than difficult. There was also dodging that felt a little off, which could often disconnect you from the fight and diminish the enjoyment of combat. The camera work, especially during stun attacks, was very disorienting, unlike the smooth cinematic combat seen in games like Ghost of Tsushima. So overall, there were a lot of combat aspects I enjoyed, but that does also come with its fair share of negatives. When it comes to the stealth in Valhalla, this game surprisingly includes some stealth elements and even lets you use the environment to hide, which is more than what Odyssey offered. However, the stealth in Valhalla to me is just straight up shit, and it does not fit the game's main focus, which is on showcasing the life of a Viking in all of its violent glory. Stealth really doesn't seem like something a Viking would do. Now about social stealth, which I just mentioned, comparing it to what we saw in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood or Revelations, Valhalla's version is very basic and limited. It feels like stealth was added as a last minute thought. For example, if you try to blend in with a crowd, it's pretty awkward because you can't match their pace exactly and it makes you stick out. Then there's hiding on benches, which used to be seamless but now requires a button press to initiate. The detection by enemies is overly sensitive in Valhalla. The slightest move can give you away, making it hard to sneak around. Once you're spotted, there's no easy escape. You're thrown into combat with no way out. I do also miss the 3-stage detection system from the earlier games, where guards would go from not caring to suspicious and then to attacking based on your actions. In the newer games, it feels like you're always on high alert, with enemies ready to attack at any moment, even if you pose no threat. Now, the parkour in the game is not anything innovative or impressive. I mean, how could it be? You play as a Viking, not an assassin. It's interesting to watch how the parkour in Assassin's Creed has changed and added new features over time. The early games laid the groundwork with their iconic free-running and dramatic leaps. Later titles like Unity and Syndicate introduced new parkour elements, such as controlled descent and the use of grappling hooks to swing to high places. Parkour has always been a big draw of the series, but when it comes to Valhalla, parkour feels different because it has a sense of heaviness. This game focuses on Vikings, who are more about strength and agility. Unlike previous characters like Arno, Ezio or even the Fry Twins, this change shows how Eivor moves, as jumping and running around feels slower and less smooth. Another gameplay feature that's worth mentioning is the leveling system. You see, in this game, instead of traditionally leveling up, you receive 2 experience points each time you would normally level up. These points are used in a very large skill tree that just hurts your eyes. It's just so big, but it's also so messy. Just trying to move the cursor around can be annoying, and you might spend a lot of time just looking for one particular skill. Unlike the simpler and more straightforward skill tree in Origins, the one in Valhalla feels complicated and disorganized. As you add more points to the tree, your power level increases, which is different from just moving up to a specific level, like level 3. So if you add 2 points, your power might go from 150 to 152. The skill tree has various benefits, like more health, stronger attacks, and better stealth. There's also special abilities, like being able to control an arrow in flight, stomp on enemies who are down, or perhaps a skill that slows down time when you dodge, making fights seem more easy. Assassin's Creed Valhalla has so many characters. In fact, this game has more characters than you realize. For example, in your settlement Ravensthorpe, there's a total of 72 characters you're able to interact or meet with. But I want you to answer me this question. If I gave you 30 seconds to name 10 of these 72 characters, could you do that? My guess is no. That's how forgettable these characters are. Ubisoft did not write any type of side story or emotional connection to any of these characters, except for maybe the likes of Sigurd, Randvi and Basim. But that's just 3 characters. Take Styrbjorn for example. This character is your father, and for somebody as important as your father, he seems to be neglected in the story and not focused on at all. He starts as the caring father of Sigurd and Eivor, but eventually just ends up causing them trouble. His role in the story is just to create problems for them. Another character that is forgettable in my opinion is Randvi. The romance part of Valhalla is not very good. The game lets you start a relationship with Eivor's own sister-in-law, which for one is just what the hell, and for 2 she's just not a very interesting character. Instead of exploring Randvi's struggles with her arranged marriage, the game makes her chase after Eivor for a quote-unquote real romance. Her voice acting is not great either, making her even more boring. And just overall, add the terrible mocap in the game for these characters and you've got yourself a very forgettable cast of characters. Now the last character is Dag, but this character is not forgettable, but instead I'll place him as wasted potential. Now Dag seemed like he might be an interesting character at first. He's a bit annoying, but it looked like he can grow into a better character alongside Sigurd and Eivor. However, the way the game handles his character is very disappointing. Instead of developing into a stronger character who challenges Eivor in a meaningful way, Dag immediately decides to out of nowhere turn against Eivor for taking on roles that Sigurd assigned Eivor to. What I didn't like is that the game doesn't allow any opportunities to talk to Dag and try to understand each other. It attempts to create drama by making Dag accuse Eivor of trying to take over, but this conflict is poorly written. Right when Eivor does something that a leader would do, Dag accuses Eivor of betrayal, even though Sigurd told him to follow Eivor's lead. It would have been better if the game allowed conversations with Dag, maybe showing that he wanted to be a leader himself but was too scared to try. They could have included hints, like a journal entry from Dag that we could interact with, expressing his dislike for Eivor and his belief that he'd be a better leader than Eivor in Sigurd's absence. This would have made Dag a much more complex character, rather than just seeming childish and complaining all the time. And of course you know the rest. We had to put him down because of how out of touch he became. Assassin's Creed Valhalla as a game is a pretty smooth one for the most part. I played it on PlayStation 5 and it performed quite well. I also played a little bit on a PC that I'd like to think is high spec with a 7800 XT, and it was consistent in its FPS. But it's not without its glitches and some strange design decisions. There are a few glitches that pop up. For example, I've seen canoes floating in the air above water in Vinland, which is quite odd. Sometimes characters that I need to talk to for a mission would not respond, and the only way to fix it was by leaving and coming back or just reloading my game save. There were also moments when characters did not move at all when they were supposed to, either to lead me to somewhere or to follow me. In the well over 100 hours I have in Valhalla, I ran into a lot of glitches that have really taken away from my enjoyment of the game. I actually like some parts of the game, but these technical issues are frustrating. Another massive glitch I encountered was in a mission in Asgard, I believe, where enemies would not attack properly and I kept dying trying to get them to follow me. I understand bugs are common in big open world games like Valhalla, and it had its fair share, especially when it first came out. Fortunately, most of these issues were fixed not long after the game's release, and it did get better over time. Now, as of me making this video, I don't know how many bugs or glitches there currently are in the game. If anyone knows, then comment below your experience. While Assassin's Creed Valhalla is successful both in reviews and sales, this doesn't necessarily mean it's a great game. It's a decent game with fun combat, but nothing more. It's a game that in my opinion lacks in its main story, and it drags on for far too long. If I was not a fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise, I would have also stopped playing this game halfway through like a lot of people, because after all, this is Ubisoft's most unfinished video game for players. Graphically, this game is amazing. I cannot say a single bad thing about how good this game looks. The idea of being a Viking is great on paper, but in my opinion the execution to blend the Viking aspect with the assassin aspect was poorly executed. Valhalla is a game that I feel like it doesn't know what it wants to be. Stealth feels ineffective and dull, and parkouring around the world of Valhalla can be awkward and just mediocre. The game's world is giant, and it's cluttered with icons, yet feels so empty. So unfortunately for me, this game is a pass. Well, I say pass, but I've already played 100 fucking hours. I meant pass as in I would not recommend it if you like the franchise. I'm actually optimistic for Assassin's Creed Red. In fact, my video on it was titled Assassin's Creed Red will be great, and I stand by that. So here's to hoping Assassin's Creed Red will deliver on how exciting it can be. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one.